When I refer to the canons of rhetoric, I'm using a term that is given to us by the Romans, and we think of rhetoric as having 5 aspects: invention, arrangement, style, delivery, and memory. I'm not going to be talking about arrangement, style, delivery, and memory today, but as we go along, we will discuss those. Instead, today I'm going to be focusing on invention. And invention tends to be the most important part of rhetoric, and it refers to the place where we create or give rise to arguments. As I've said before, epistemology is perhaps the most important theory that affects the kind of rhetoric that we believe or practice. And that notion of where knowledge comes from is going to be fundamental in our understanding of invention. If we hold that science is the only true source of knowledge, then the arguments that we put together or invent are going to come out of a scientific base of information, that is, information that has been hypothesized and tested and has experiments to refer to it and has been replicated. If our epistemological view includes the mystic or the religious, then we might consider that religious texts can support our understanding of knowledge. If we do believe in the religious, many religions believe in the notion of inspiration from a sort of superhuman source, and so invention might come from inspiration, a truly perhaps original sort of thing. Also a sort of thing that one can't go out and seek. It has to, you have to be taken over by it. So invention is going to be very key to the sort of rhetoric that we produce and the kinds of roles we think rhetoric serves. For the Greeks in 5th century BCE, there were 2 kinds of laws or ways of viewing how the world works. There were the nomos and the phusis. Now, phusis is pronounced with the F and the U sound, phusis, but it's spelled like you would spell physics. We think of physics or physical laws as laws that are observations about the world. Again, this is a scientific sort of thing. They're not laws in the sense that you shouldn't go more than 20 miles an hour in a school zone, but rather laws such as gravity. And I think that the confusion of those two, and in fact, there's that T-shirt that says, gravity, obey it, it's the law. You know, this notion that we could have choice with regard to gravity is funny because it's not that sort of law. So phusis refers to the sort of law that is kind of capital T truth, capital L law. It is a fundamental feature of the universe. So phusis is not something that exists in a creative force. Rather, it is an entity that must be discovered and known based on a reality. Nomos, however, are the sets of laws that are human-created and that might vary from culture to culture. Nomoi, which is the plural, the OI, nomoi, can be everything from what speed we go in a particular zone in our town to whether or not we have laws that allow one individual to take the life of another individual. So nomoi typically are those rules that cultures agree on. They can be more or less reliable, more or less stable, depending on the culture, but they are human created rather than universal sorts of notions or sorts of truths that can't be questioned. Now, from these 2 notions, we have this understanding of doxa, and doxa is opinion. Doxa is probably a weaker form of knowledge than is nomoi, and doxa is definitely something that we have to come together and decide on. Doxa is very much related to the notion of discourse and of language use. And that the way we see the world, the way we believe the world works, is something that we negotiate with language. Now, before the 5th century BC, or maybe very early, we have a document called the Dissoi Logoi. We don't know who wrote it. It's possible that it was Gorgias. But it was clearly one of the individuals from this group that we call the Sophists, in the sense that this was clearly someone who traveled. And based on travels, one of the things that happens with travelers is that they discover that some of the most basic doxa in a culture, the most basic nomoi or practices, can change from one culture to the other. This is one of my favorite sections from the Dissoi Logoi because I think it really makes the point clearly. Twofold arguments are also put forward concerning the seemly and the disgraceful. Some say the seemly is one thing and the disgraceful another, and that as the name differs, so does the thing named. And others say that the seemly and disgraceful are the same thing. The Mazagites cut up their parents and eat them, and they think that to be buried in their children is the most beautiful grave imaginable. But in Greece, if anyone did such a thing, he would be driven out of the country and would die an ignominious death for having committed such disgraceful and terrible deeds. So a practice that is religious in nature, that is, how do we practice burial, or what do we do with bodies after death? These things are deeply related to our religious concepts, and they tend to have very ethical, moral worth in a culture. The thing I think that is shocking for those who travel is that a thing that may seem very holy to you might seem extremely disgraceful to another, and that the notion of the inherently wrong is not one that transcends all cultures, or the inherently good. The Dissoi Logoi then is the two words, the two-sided word, or the two-sided argument. That is, for every it, there's an other. And that we have got to interact with those determinations and be aware of their shifting. Now, this is where the Sophists earned their label of being relativists, and the notion that there are no stable rights and wrongs, but only rights and wrongs, or only doxa, only the things that we've decided on as a culture. And again, I think that it's possible to have moral relativity and not have scientific relativity. There are a lot of different versions of this, and it really depends on the sophist or the philosopher that we're talking about. One of the things that happens once we're able to write things down in culture, and one of the things that was happening in 5th century BCE, is the impact that writing was having as a technology. A lot of things happen once you can record a word, and one of the things that can happen is that you can create a document like the Dissoi Logoi, which records a variety of practices and a variety of cultures, and that can be passed on or transmitted to a culture and a group of people who have never left their city-state. Another aspect of writing and the technology of writing is that it allows us to create categories and create complexity within those categories. One way that we see this working is in law. It's easier to have a variety of kinds of acts that we would call murder if we have a written document to record it. We can record a variety of circumstances and situations that might have an impact on how we define a term or how we practice a term. Heuristics are one of the things that result out of writing as technology, and that is templates or patterns that give rise to knowledge. This relates back to doxa and the notion of the Dissoi Logoi, because we can get past, to some degree, a sense of what I do and what you do are just simply the alternatives that we have, that all we have are common practice or stories that are told. Instead, we can codify, we can hierarchize, and organize. And heuristics are these things. They're templates that we put on to knowledge that, in effect, create a new sort of knowledge. And invention and heuristics are key to the growth of rhetoric. And they allow us to have something like a genre that has rules that we have to follow. I mean, any of you who have any acquaintance with law will know that legal documents are very, very specific and at times idiosyncratic, depending on who's reading them and why we're reading them. If you've ever filled out a real estate contract, you know how completely convoluted the language is and how the most basic of things has to be certified and so on. Most of those contracts are heuristics. Now, heuristics produce a sort of knowledge, and they also contain knowledge. They give us certain predictions.